God bless you, Facebook family. I'm a host, Maurice C.B. Johns, a voice crying in the diaspora. I welcome those on tonight, Sister Geraldine, Brother Culpepper, that's with me. And tonight, this evening, matter of fact, we have a great subject. And our subject today is My People Are Destroyed for the Lack of Knowledge. And I tell you, I have two great videos that I want you to really look at because we as a people don't really know our identity, our purpose, and our destiny. And so we've been lost through a lot of lies that we were told. And so what I want to do is to go back into history when things first began to start and let you look at this video, begin to digest the video, and go home and study, do your homework. And that's one of the things that we don't do as a people. We don't study, go home and do our homework. So it's incumbent upon me to do this today. And me and others that are with me is to try and help you to wake up and see who you are. My love for you, brethren, is so great that you don't understand my love for you. Some of you have disowned me because of what I'm teaching and what we believe in, but I'm still going to have love for you anyway because of your ignorance, and that's not to take that as a derogative speech or gender, but it's just to let you know that we need
Hey,
knowledge of God, all of
Mama,
the knowledge of God.
Mama,
We need that knowledge.
Mama,
Sister Deborah, can you mute your mic?
Mama.
Okay. We need
Hmm. You called us? Hmm.
we need to believe that the teaching on this evening, the Most High God will deliver us and bring us through that we need to be delivered and brought from out of this bondage that we're in. We're in captivity, so I'm not going to hold you all any longer. But I'm going to ask you to be attentive to the teaching today and to the videos that I'm going to show you. But first of all, I want to thank everybody for coming on this day, and I want to thank you so much, okay, for viewing us. My brother, I'm going to ask you to read. This is referring to the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church has been an omen. They are the progenitors, the one who have us deceived. When our ancestors was in captivity, they came over in ships. And so I just have a plethora of information that I want to release to you today, okay?
Permits the exercise of the Roman Catholic Creed only. Every other mode of worship is prohibited. 4. Negroes placed under the direction or supervision of any other person than a Catholic are liable to confiscation. 5. Sundays and holidays are to be strictly observed. All Negroes found at work on these days are to be confiscated. 6. We forbid our white subjects of both sexes to marry with the blacks under the penalty of being fined and subjected to some other arbitrary punishment. We forbid all curates, priests, or missionaries of our secular or regular clergy, and even our chaplains in our Navy. And even our chaplains in our Navy to sanction such marriages. We also forbid all our white subjects, and even the manumitted or freeborn blacks to live in a state of concubinage with blacks. Should there be any issue from this kind of, let me move this out the way so I can see better. Better intercourse. It is our will that the person so offending and the master of the slave should pay each a fine of 300 livres. Should said issue be the result of of intercourse. It is our will that the person so offending and the master of the slave should pay each a fine of 300 livres. Should said issue be the result of the concubinage of the master with his slave, said master shall not only pay the fine, but be deprived of the slave and of the children who shall be adjudged to the hospital or the locality, and said slaves shall be forever incapable of being set free. But should this illicit intercourse have existed between a free black and his slave, when said free black had no legitimate wife, and should said black marry said slave according to the forms prescribed by the church, said slave shall be thereby set free, and the children shall also become free and legitimate, and in such a case there shall be no application of the penalties mentioned in the present article.
Yeah, I want to go a little further here and let the people know how treacherous the Catholic Church was. Okay, and some of them that wear the New Orleans Saints fleur de lis, our ancestors was beaten with those leaves during this time of punishment. Okay, so let me get here in a minute. Okay. Okay, my brother, right here.
What from Matt? Okay. We forbid slaves to carry offensive weapons or heavy sticks under the penalty of being whipped and of having said weapons confiscated for the benefit of the person seizing the same. An exception is made in favor of those slaves who are sent a hunting or a shooting by shooting by their masters, and who carry with them a written permission to that effect, or are designated by some known mark or badge. 13. We forbid slaves belonging to different masters to gather in crowds, either by day or by night, under the pretext of a wedding.
We're facing those same things today. Okay, those same laws are still in our system today. Go ahead.
Or for any other cause, either at the dwelling or on the grounds of one of their masters or elsewhere, and much less on the highways or in secluded places under the penalty of corporal punishment, which shall not be less than the whip. In case of frequent offenses of the kind, the offender shall be branded with the mark of the flower de luce.
Okay, right here, people, if our ancestors would knew that you all are running behind a football team with this flower called the full of the loose on it, they would turn over in their grave and look at you very strange. See, we perish for the lack of knowledge. Okay, you only look at 66 books and that's all you look at. But I got something that's going to shock you like never before in a minute, because you need to know your history. You need to do your homework and find out where Christianity came from, and also Jesus Christ, who you worship. When the Most High God said, worship no other God but me. Okay, go ahead, my brother.
And should there be aggravating circumstances, capital punishment may be applied. And at the discretion of our judges, we command all our subjects, be they officers or not. You kind of lost me there. Well, officers or not, to seize all such offenders, to arrest and conduct them to prison, although there should be no judgment against them. 14. Masters who shall be convicted of having permitted or tolerated such gatherings as aforesaid, composed of other slaves than their own, shall be sentenced individually to indemnify their neighbors for the damages occasioned by said gatherings, and to pay for the first time a fine of 30 livres, and double that sum on the repetition of the offense. 15, we forbid Negroes to sell any commodities, provisions, or produce of any kind without the written permission of their masters or without wearing their own marks or badges, and any persons purchasing anything from the Negroes in violence of this article shall be sentenced to pay a fine of 1,500 livres.
Okay, hold on.
16.
Okay, hold on one moment. Okay, let's see here. And then we're going to get to the videos, okay? But I want them to see how beautiful the Catholic Church, who is the Christian church, okay, what they said. Let me see here. Okay, let's see. And after we do this section, then I'm going to go and watch. We're going to look at the videos and get more clarity on what's going on here. Okay. Okay, let's read here. Right here.
29. Thefts or importance, and even the stealing of horses, mares, mules, oxen, or cows when executed by slaves or manumitted persons shall make the offender liable to corporal and even to capital punishment according to the circumstances of the case. 30. The stealing of sheep, goats, hogs, poultry, grain, vegetables, grain fodder, peas, beans, or other vegetables, produce, or provisions when committed by the slaves shall be punished according to the circumstances of the case, and the judges may sentence them, if necessary, to be whipped by the public, executed, and branded with the mark of the flower de luce.
This is the same flower that our people are walking around with the New Orleans Saints, the fleur de lis on. This is the same flower that they beat our ancestors with. Okay. All right. Okay. 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 Now we have Jesus spelled out. And in a minute, if I can get a chance to do the other video, I want to explain to you all what Jesus really means. And you'll find out when we get to the other part of the videos. But anyway, when we spell out Jesus, it means J, joint, E is for European, S is for slave, U is for union, S is for ship. So you put all this together that happened during the the transatlantic slave route, you have what came together was the joint European slave union ship. And I have evidence, receipts to back that up on the video. But this is how Christianity came about when they took our ancestors from West Africa and scattered them to the othermost parts of the earth. So this is what we have. When you look at Jesus, you'll find out the information that you need to know even more on the other video that I might have. Get a chance to show you, okay?
A wooden stock in the Bible. These elements formed an unlikely powerful combination in one of the darkest periods of our history. As we explore the pages of history, we find ourselves confronted with a haunting question. How did these seemingly disparate elements converge to sustain a system?
Okay, so what we're seeing here is that you're going to get some knowledge of the slave Bible. Okay, the slave Bible is very important. That's what they use to deceive, manipulate our ancestors, and even you today have the slave Bible and don't understand or realize that you do have the slave Bible. So hopefully this information can wake you.
Of oppression that spanned centuries. Imagine enduring brutal punishment, where the pain is unbearable and cries for mercy go unanswered. You desperately call out to your master for relief. However, no mercy is shown, neither by the one who commands you on earth nor the higher powers. Yet, not only do you suffer this terrible abuse, but you also come to accept it as your destiny. And all of this unfolds in the name of something that is revered for instilling hope in people's hearts, the unwavering word of God, the Bible. Have you ever wondered why slaveholders felt no remorse in treating humans as property? Or, more importantly, why those suffering accepted this inhumane treatment? There must have been, even if faint, an urge to retaliate when faced with relentless cruelty. Why didn't they? Let's embark on this unsettling journey through the past, where I invite you to find answers to these and other pressing questions. This is the account of how slaves were subjected to brutality and inhumanity by the 19th century Christians, all in the name of religion. Welcome to Black History Diary, where we delve into the dark, often overlooked alleys of history. I encourage you to gather the hard truths from this journey and use them to unlearn and relearn real history. Today I discuss how slaveholders used the Bible as a tool to perpetuate slavery and suppress any resistance from the slaves against their
Gabapentin is bringing you closer to amputation. These are 3 symptoms that are signaling that you could be close to losing your foot.
inhumane treatment. From Frederick Douglass to Solomon Northup, history is filled with stories of this murky collusion of religion and the perpetuation of slavery. Let's unveil this unholy alliance and explore why it was so easy for slaveholders to justify their cruel behavior through the Bible in front of the slaves. Imagine a time when a Bible verse like Luke 12:47 was interpreted to justify a painful reality. And that servant which knew his Lord's will and prepared himself not, neither did according to his will, shall be beaten with many stripes. Now let's journey into the heart-wrenching stories of those who lived through this era, where faith and cruelty intersected in unimaginable ways. Consider the story of Abram, a fictional yet representative character, embodying the experiences of many enslaved individuals. On his first day with the new master, Abram hears these words from the Bible. Realizing his bondage is now intertwined with religious justification. While Abram is not a real person, his story mirrors the harsh truths that many faced. The film 12 Years a Slave, based on Solomon Northup's real-life experiences, depicts this intersection of scripture and slavery. Solomon's master, Edwin Epps, cites the same verse as rationale for punishing slaves who underperform. This portrayal isn't just a cinematic adaptation. It reflects actual events from the past. This historical period saw the Bible being used as a tool to endorse and rationalize slavery. It poses a critical question. How did such practices align with the broader Christian teachings of compassion and kindness? Verses like Exodus 21:20-21, which states, "Anyone who beats their male or female slave with a rod must be punished if the slave dies as a direct result. But they are not to be punished if the slave recovers after a day or two, since the slave is their property." Yet this interpretation wasn't universally accepted. Many Christians, guided by the same scriptures, opposed slavery, emphasizing the Bible's themes of love and freedom. The relationship between the Bible and slavery illustrates the complexities of religious interpretation. Narratives such as, "When a man sells his daughter as a slave, she shall not go out as the male slaves do." Exodus 21:7-11. And, "Slaves, obey your earthly masters in everything." Colossians 3:22. These not only influenced the physical conditions of the slaves, but also had profound psychological and spiritual impacts. In exploring these historical facets, it's essential to recognize the layered nature of scriptural interpretation and its impact on people's lives. This journey through history reminds us of the powerful influence of religious texts and the responsibility that accompanies their interpretation. Plantation owners in the southern states of the U.S. used specific verses to continue the practice of slavery and profit from it. Interestingly, or rather tragically, among the hundreds of thousands of words of scripture, these Christians often focused on select verses that seemed to justify slavery. For them, the Bible provided a moral justification for their actions. They believed they could mistreat slaves, treating them more like tools than people, while considering themselves devout and compassionate. Moreover, these same verses were used to suppress any resistance from the slaves, helping to maintain an institution that was highly beneficial to the owners. One such verse is, "Servants, be subject to your masters with all respect, not only to the good and gentle, but also to the unjust." 1 Peter 2:18. This may explain why some religious slaveholders were notoriously cruel. Frederick Douglass, a former slave who became a prominent abolitionist and activist, labeled these religious slaveholders as the worst. In his autobiography, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave, he describes how his master, Thomas Auld, became more cruel after a religious conversion. Douglass believed that this change was due to Auld feeling religiously justified in his cruelty. Douglass, who resisted oppression in many instances, became a particular challenge for his master. Auld sent him to Edward Covey, known for his brutal tactics in breaking the spirit of slaves. Covey, a religious instructor, was paradoxically both devout and harsh, often punishing Douglass severely. Douglass describes this experience vividly, saying, "I was broken in body, soul, and spirit. The dark night of slavery closed in upon me, and behold, a man transformed into a brute." This account provides insight into the psychological impact of such cruelty. The goal was not just to control the slaves, but to strip them of their humanity, reducing them to mere tools. The Bible, in these instances, was used as a means to justify such treatment. Historians like Larry Tice note that many ministers supported slavery, with nearly half of all pro-slavery defenses in America being written by them. This mindset didn't end with emancipation. It continued into the era of Jim Crow laws and even opposition to the Civil Rights Movement. An editorial from the 1950s in the Alabama Baptist newspaper.
When I started drinking salt water for my gums, my friends laughed at me. But when they saw how fast my
exemplifies this, stating a resistance to racial integration in the name of divine creation. This raises a significant question. Why didn't slaves question this problematic interpretation of religion? Why did they often accept what they were told without independent thought? The persistence of slavery for more than 250 years was partly due to a specific tool, the prohibition of literacy among slaves. Slaves were generally not allowed to read and write. Many slaves, brought from different countries, faced a language barrier that prevented them from reading the scriptures themselves. Furthermore, their masters forbade any learning beyond what was necessary for their servitude. Those who dared to learn to read and write often faced severe punishments, sometimes even leading to death. Frederick Douglass's narrative provides a poignant example. His master's wife, Mrs. Auld, began teaching him to read. But when her husband discovered this, he strictly prohibited it. He believed that educating slaves would make them unmanageable. Despite this, Douglass secretly learned to read and write, becoming one of the few slaves who acquired literacy. The fear among slaveholders of educated slaves was so significant that it led to legal actions. For instance, North Carolina passed a law making it illegal to teach slaves to read or write, punishable by a fine for white offenders and lashes or imprisonment for black offenders. The manipulation of religion to sustain slavery didn't stop there. Slaveholders used a modified version of the Bible known as the Slave Bible to further control and indoctrinate slaves. This version used by British missionaries to convert and educate slaves was significantly different from the one given to their masters. Visiting the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C., you'll come across a remarkable artifact, a Bible dating back to the 1800s. What makes this Bible so distinctive? It was utilized by the British missionaries to teach and convert enslaved individuals. Astonishingly, they required a different version from the one intended for their masters. Even the Word of God, it seems, had to consider people's social status. This slave Bible was unique not only in its rarity, but in its content, omitting any text that might encourage thoughts of rebellion or freedom. It excluded a vast portion of the standard scriptures. 90% of the Old Testament and 50% of the New Testament were removed. For instance, it left out passages like Galatians 3:28, which speaks of equality in Christ, while emphasizing verses that supported the practice of slavery, such as Ephesians 6:5. In the southern states, the sermons delivered to slaves primarily focused on the importance of being obedient slaves. Some of these sermons were even published to guide other slave owners in religious instruction. Have you ever seen a piece of glass so cracked and fragmented that it's nearly shattered? That's becoming a metaphor for our society. But there's hope. We still have a chance for redemption and to remain whole. Let's find out why I say this about our society and its connection to the history of slavery. What we're experiencing today is the aftermath of what I've been discussing in this video, the manipulation of religion for personal gain. Today we find ourselves embroiled in conflicts over beliefs handed down by our ancestors. This isn't about which belief system is right, but about the power of belief itself. Back then, slavery was driven not just by racism, but largely by economic motives. However, racism played a significant role. The choice to enslave African people and view them as lesser beings was inherently racist. This leads to a crucial question. Is the Bible to blame, or those who interpreted it to justify their action?
Okay, I would like to say that when they use the word black, that's a byword. Okay, these words was used to keep you from knowing your identity, to know who you were as the chosen people of the Most High God. But still today, we have been using those bywords as far as Negroes, nigger, African Americans, colored people. To today, people are still indoctrinated, or should I say deceived, by all of these lies that was given to us by our slave masters or oppressors today. And people are still in the churches, still lying to people. People, you have to wake up. This teaching is given to you, but you guys don't want to hear this though, because the Most High God said that 2/3 of you are going to perish. Okay, 2/3 of you are going to perish, Israel, because of your stiff-neckedness and because you're hard-headed. Now, what I want to do, because of time's sake, I want to go to another video. Okay, and this video is called "A Ship Called Jesus." This is how some of you all are so messed up in your doctrine, okay? Because these people have indoctrinated you with the Greco-Roman ideology and philosophy of your denomination or whatever religion you are in, okay? This is going to cause you to be destroyed. And my subject today is the people perish for the lack of knowledge. And you are perishing because the only book that you know is the 66 books or King James, who was notorious for lying and deceiving people. So we're going to go to the next video called "A Ship Called Jesus." I want you to be very attentive on this. My people perish for the lack of knowledge. Now, if I had a choir in here singing of some mess, you want to view anything that's destructive, you want to view. But when it comes to the truth, y'all don't want to hear the truth. You want to hear a lie because you've been deceived for so long. And preachers, the Most High God never called you all apostles. He calls prophets and prophetess, but not you guys. But guess what? You would never, ever see the full knowledge of the Most High God until you wake up. Brother Culpepper, while I'm getting this video, or anybody wants to elaborate on this, please. Okay.
No, I ain't got nothing right now. I'm sitting back. I'm just pulling it all in, brother. It's all good.
Yeah. Okay, I want to get this video here because our people are perishing for the lack of knowledge, okay? And We need to get more clarity as far as
Over the years, the Bible has been used to justify various actions and beliefs. Interpretations vary.
okay. Yeah, you don't have to get it from me or anybody else because it's going to get you. Okay, you're gonna wake up and find out that why I have been lied to. Okay, I have been lied to. Okay. Yes, you have been lied to. Okay. So that's why I like to have these things presented to you, because a lot of you all are, you don't say anything. Maybe you learn them. I never heard anybody say, well, I don't say anything because I'm this and that. But in a minute, we're going to have to speak out on this.
Dentists hate when you do this, but they can't stop you. This new $100 dental device uses cutting.
I have to find the right video.
Your new book.
You guys see the video?
With a very interesting title.
Yes.
Slave Ship Called Jesus. You know, when I first saw this book and I considered us featuring it, I said, I hope I won't get in trouble with viewers. I've been considering, of course, for obvious reasons.
It is hard hitting.
Yeah, a slave ship called Jesus. Why this title and what motivated this book? I would like you to introduce it to viewers and then we dig in.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the title is concerned, I was just minding my own business. I was just, as any educated African should, seeking to teach myself about what happened in that trade. What was it all about? How did it start?
And by trade, you mean
the slave trade.
Transatlantic slave
The transatlantic slave trade. How did it start? What was going on? And it's in the course of research that you come across certain factual details. And finding that one of the ships was called Amazing Grace. Another one was called a slave ship. It was called, the Jesus of Lubeck. Now that hit me hard. Given that I was raised in a Christian setting, I was struck by the fact that this evil trade, this where you ship people out of their continent, you wrench them out of their environment, you shove them into the boat, chain them down, you sail them across the oceans onto these plantations where they're often worked to death systematically. And these ships can be called the Jesus of Lubeck. Religious names.
On the first day of the month of August 2022, a group of the leaders of the global reparations movement met with the Vatican to discuss the Catholic Church's involvement with the transatlantic slave trade and ways in which the Church can make amends with the descendants of enslaved Africans. The group had detailed on the need for the Church to formally address its role with a papal reparations commission and financial retribution for the lineages of African ancestors who were victims of slavery in the past. The Global Circle for Reparations and Healing, GCRH, a delegation of reparations leaders arrived in Rome, led by Cam Howard, Director of Reparations United, and included Dr. Ron Daniels, convener of the National African American Reparations Commission, NAARC, Dr. Amara Enya, strategist for the GCRH, and Nicole Hannah-Jones, author of The 1619 Project, A New Origin Story. They had met with Bishop Paul Teig, Secretary of the Pontifical Council of Culture, at the Vatican. The group delivered a presentment outlining the harms and offences of the Church regarding the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. The presentment also referenced the legacy of those harms and offences and reparations measures that are needed for full repair.
The effects of the transatlantic slave trade and the harms inflicted on our ancestors continue to cause systemic damage to this day.
Thus said Cam Howard, Director of Reparations United, who is co-convener of the GCRH.
The Catholic Church has admitted that it played a role in the transatlantic slave trade, and the purpose of our meeting was to provide a roadmap to allow us to move forward toward true reparatory justice. The focus now will be on continued conversations to move the work forward to ensure repair becomes a reality.
During the meeting, Bishop Tigges suggested that the moment is ripe for the presentment to be seriously considered by the Church under the guidance of Pope Francis. He cited Pope Francis's encyclical Fratelli Tutti as evidence of the pontiff's commitment to explore issues of justice.
Okay, these guys are all liars. Okay, they're all liars, and we're not going to believe them today. Even though some of you are deceived, those of us that have awakened, we're not going to believe those lies. Okay, we can't do it. We're not going to do it.
May never realize how deeply slavery was embedded in the American economy. Slavery fueled the growth of many of our contemporary institutions, including the Catholic Church. Many Southern Christians felt that slavery, in one Baptist minister's words, stands as an institution of God. Here are some common arguments made by Christians at the time. 1. Abraham, the father of faith, and all the patriarchs held slaves without God's disapproval. Genesis 21 verses 9 to 10.
All you Baptists out there, this is the doctrine that you follow. And I told you that you guys was Catholic. So the same lies that they had back then, you have instituted those lies into your denominations. You're Catholic. I told you that from the beginning. You are Catholic. You're not saved. Israel, wake up, my people.
2. Canaan, Ham's son, was made a slave to his brothers. Genesis 9 verses 24 to 27. 3. The Ten Commandments mentioned slavery twice, showing God's implicit acceptance of it. Exodus chapter 20 verses 10 and 17. 4. Slavery was widespread throughout the Roman world, and yet Jesus never spoke against it. 5. The Apostle Paul specifically commanded slaves to obey their masters. Ephesians 6 verses 5 to 8. 6. Paul returned a runaway slave, Philemon, to his master. Book of Philemon 12. 7. Slavery removes people from a culture that worshipped the devil, practiced witchcraft and sorcery and other evils. This one really held grounds then, as though witchcraft and sorcery weren't also practiced by Europeans and the Western world at large. 8. Under slavery, people are treated with kindness, as many northern visitors can attest. I wonder who were the northern visitors that could attest to a thing such as kindness in the gross inhumanity of slavery. 9. Slavery is God's means of protecting and providing for an inferior race, suffering the curse of Ham in Genesis 9 verse 25, or even the punishment of Cain in Genesis 4 verse 12. 10. Those who support abolition of slavery are, in James H. Thornwell's words, atheists, socialists, communists, and red Republicans. This could just go on, taking one's mind into a labyrinth of confusion and sorrow. Many of us view the Catholic Church as a northern church, but the Catholic Church established its foothold in the South and relied on plantations and slave labor to help.
That's why some of you guys have plantation pastors today teaching you those same lies, and they want to use the Hamitic version of the Bible to say you were cursed, to keep the identity of you being Semitic, which is Shemites, okay, Semitic people, okay, they're hiding that Shem away from you so that you won't have the identity to know who you are. So anytime this is why they're calling you black people and black Americans, African Americans, you receive this curse from Ham. It's once again to keep you from being who you are as a chosen people of the Most High God, Israel or Yehuda, Judah. All right, wake up, my people, wake up.
Help finance the livelihoods of its priests and nuns, and to support its schools and religious projects. This is the history that we all should know. Enslaved people have largely been left out of the origin story that is traditionally told about the Catholic Church and other religious institutions. In 2005, for example, Cardinal Avery Dulles wrote a book review in First Things, claiming that the popes had denounced the trade in African slaves from its very beginnings, and yet had never condemned slavery as such, retaining a continuity of teaching that always allowed for some attenuated forms of servitude. Other apologists have taken a more absolute position. The Church has always been against slavery itself. Both these lines of argumentation seem to agree on two central assertions. The popes always condemned the trade in African slaves, and the Church's teaching did not change. Defending the church either in its reputation or its doctrinal continuity can be praiseworthy. But when it comes to the history of the Catholic Church and slaveholding, this posture of defense has been deeply damaging. It has unnecessarily led to confusion around the Church's history with slaveholding, and that confusion has helped to prevent the Church from reckoning with a troubling history whose consequences are still present in our world. And yet it was once widely known, and still is among historians of slavery today, that the Catholic Church once embraced slavery in theory and in practice. Repeatedly authorized the trade in enslaved Africans and allowed its priests, religious and laity to keep people as enslaved chattel. The Jesuits, for example, by the historian Andrew Deal's count, owned over 20,000 enslaved people circa 1760. The Jesuits and other slaveholding bishops, priests and religious were not disciplined for their slaveholding because they were not breaking church teachings. Slaveholding was allowed by the Catholic Church. In reacting to the effects of European encroachments into Africa, Jomo Kenyatta had said, "When the Europeans came to our lands, we had the lands and they had the Bible. They taught us to pray with our eyes closed. When we opened our eyes, they had the land and we had the Bible." Dr. Joseph Ben Yochanan had also stated, "Africa took both the hook, the line and the sinker." Another one, from Dr. J. Henrik Clark. "I question the intelligence of anyone who believes that everything written in the Bible is true." Yet another one still from Napoleon Bonaparte, who said, "Religion had stopped the poor from killing the rich." In Europe, Karl Marx had stated too that religion is the opium of the masses. The list could go on and on and on. The transatlantic slave trade was introduced by the coming of the Europeans, who came with the Bible in the same manner that Arab raiders and traders from the Middle East and North Africa introduced Islam through the trans-Saharan slave trade. In fact, the church was the backbone of the slave trade, historians had pointed out. In other words, most of the slave traders and slave ship captains were very good Christians. For example, Sir John Hawkins, the first slave ship captain to bring African slaves to the Americas, was a religious man who insisted that his crew serve God daily and love one another. His ship, ironically called the Good Ship Jesus, left the shores of his native England for Africa in October 1562. Yes, you heard right. The first British slave ship to reach the Americas was called the Good Jesus. What has come to be referred to as the Good Ship Jesus was in fact the Jesus of Lubeck, a 700-ton ship purchased by King Henry VIII from the Hanseatic League, a merchant alliance between the cities of Hamburg and Lubeck in Germany. 20 years after its purchase, the ship, in disrepair, was lent to Sir John Hawkins by Queen Elizabeth. John Hawkins had the dubious distinction of becoming the first slave ship captain to bring Africans to the Americas. He was granted permission from Queen Elizabeth for his first voyage in 1562. He was allowed to carry Africans to the Americas with their own free consent, and he agreed to this condition. Hawkins had a reputation for being a religious man who required his crew to serve God daily and to love one another. Sir Francis Drake, a cousin to Hawkins, accompanied Hawkins on this voyage and a subsequent others. Drake, too, was himself devoutly religious. Services were held on board twice a day. In this very voyage, off the coast of Africa near Sierra Leone, Hawkins captured 300 to 500 slaves, mostly by plundering Portuguese ships, but also through violence and subterfuge, promising Africans free land and riches in the New World. He sold most of the slaves in what is now known as the Dominican Republic. He returned home with a profit and ships laden with ivory, hides and sugar. Thus had begun the slave trade. On his return to England, Queen Elizabeth had grown very furious at Hawkins, charging that his endeavour was detestable and would call down vengeance from heaven upon the undertakers. When Elizabeth became fully aware, however, of the profits to be made, she had joined in partnership with Hawkins and provided him with the Jesus of Lubeck, aka the Good Ship Jesus. A later slaving expedition in 1567, consisting of 5 ships, and the Jesus of Lubeck met with resistance from the Spaniards at St. Juan de Ulloa in Mexico. Since the slave trade was illegal, Spanish colonists usually required a charade of force from British ships, after which they would buy slaves at a discount. This time around, however, the Spaniards attacked the British ships and the Jesus of Lubeck, cumbersome and difficult to maneuver, was sunk and the crew slaughtered. Hawkins escaped with Drake on a smaller ship. Hawkins, his piratic ambitions dashed, returned to England and remained there in the service of the Queen. He gained distinction for his pivotal role in defeating the Spanish Armada and was knighted in 1588. The British did not initiate, but they did dominate the Atlantic slave trade. Few expressed moral or ethical doubts about slavery. The Anglican Church was directly involved in slavery. When a Christian voice was raised against the slave trade, it was led by Quakers who also played a critical role in the campaign to end the slave trade. In fact, few people raised their voice against the Atlantic slave trade until the mid-18th century. There had been isolated objectors, but on the whole, the trade developed without any real sense of religious objection. It was almost as if the slave trade was morally neutral. It is true there had been the occasional Christian denunciation of slave trading, most notably from early Puritans and Quakers. George Fox had denounced it as early as 1673, but as the trade grew, involving ever more people and industries to feed the slave ships, and as the material bounty from the slave colonies flowed back to Britain, such criticisms were drowned out by the sound of profitable trade. In the century before abolition in 1807, the British had shipped more than 3 million Africans to the plantations. The suffering of the Africans on the ships and plantations were undeniable, but raised barely a whisper. Indeed, godly men came to think of the trade as a simple fact of life. God-fearing men went about their godless business. George Whitefield, an evangelist in America, did not approve of slavery, but he nonetheless owned slaves. The young slave captain John Newton saw nothing odd as he put his rebellious Africans in the thumbscrews, before settling down to pray for a safe and profitable passage to the Americas. Newton came to regret his slaving past, and is now more famous as a cleric and hymn writer than a slave trader, but his conversion was not so much a sudden revelation as a gradual dawning of true faith and a rejection of his sinful past. And there had been nothing more sinful than his slaving days, though at the time neither he nor thousands more thought it wicked. Through all this, the Church of England was, by turns, complicit and then transformed. By a quirk of inheritance, the Anglican SPCG, founded in 1701, had inherited plantations in 1710, mainly in Barbados, from Christopher Codrington, a former soldier, government official and planter. The plantations and their resident slaves were managed like any other absentee plantation, their sugar-based profits flowing back to their owners, the Church of England. The slaves were branded, a common pattern in the islands, and there were occasional concerns expressed about their well-being. In 1760, the Archbishop of Canterbury wrote, "I have long worried and lamented that the Negroes in our plantations decrease. Surely this proceeds from some defect, both of humanity and even of good policy, but we must take things as they are at present." And so it continued until, at full emancipation in 1833, the Church was compensated to the tune of £8,833 for the loss of their slaves on Codrington. Throughout, whatever the unease or discomfort, there was no sense that slave ownership was irreligious. It was a matter of rendering unto Caesar. The Church was present throughout the lifespan of slavery in the New World. Contrary to popular opinion, Christianity was by no means solely an anti-slavery advocate. For the most part, there is plenty of evidence to support the Christian Church's struggle for the abolition of the despicable institution. But there is also evidence to defend the contrary. Because slavery was such a lucrative business, many in the Church continued to profit from the despicable institution. Notwithstanding this, there were still many who were adamant abolitionists. However, there are obviously many different forms of religion derived from Catholic and Protestant roots, as well as an infinite number of independent beliefs. Different Christian sects had different ways of addressing the sensitive topic of African bondage. There were differences of opinion both among and within these denominations when it came to slavery. Even the Quakers, who developed a firm objection to slavery, had problems convincing all of their members that it was evil. Some of them even owned slaves. Some historians argue that if churches had used their power, the Atlantic slave trade might have never occurred. One of them was Albert Barnes, a 19th century abolitionist, who suggested that the institution of Christianity alone was powerful enough to have stopped or even prevented slavery from developing in the New World. The Church, he argued, was the great opponent of slavery during the Roman Empire, as well as during colonialism in the New World. Although the latter point is particularly debatable, yet Barnes believed that if all of the different denominations pulled together, there would be no other power strong enough to combat it. Slavery would have been non-existent. Still, the fact remains that many slaveholders were Christians, and some were even members of the clergy. Even some missionaries to the colonies owned slaves. Bartolomé de las Casas, a Catholic priest and missionary who stationed in Hispaniola in the early 16th century, owned Native American slaves and later swapped them in for the more durable and work-friendly African slaves. He wrote to Spain suggesting
Anyone suffering from swollen feet needs to know about this 7-second fluid release method.
that the slaveholders ceased the use of Native Americans as slaves because they were unable to cope with the harsh working conditions and European diseases that were wiping them out. The Africans, on the other hand, were sturdier and better equipped to withstand European disease. The Catholic Church had a major presence in slavery in the New World. According to Richard Miller, Catholic countries were the prime movers in the revival of slavery in the Old World and the introduction of it into the New World. The Church of Rome did not consider the African slave a human being until 1839. Miller adds that this only occurred after the abolition movement by the American Anti-Slavery Society and the certainty of the handwriting on the wall that someday slavery would be abolished. Even though there were missionaries in the islands who were devoted to the abolition of slavery, there were some that were just as bad as the plantation holders when it came to the treatment of their slaves. Halley argued that the Baptist missionaries in Barbados petitioned for the emancipation of slaves, or at least the improvement of their living conditions, yet they were severely mistreating their own slaves. He also reported that the missionaries neglected the slaves' religious lessons and did not permit their slaves to learn to read. The slaves were not even given their Sabbath to worship. This time was allotted to them to care for their own land. Robert Halley had similar comments on the slaves in Mauritius and Jamaica.
Okay, notice once again that Africans didn't have a Sabbath day. It was Israel, the Negroes, that worshiped the Sabbath. So anytime you hear the word Africans, once again, my people, they're not talking about the people from Africa. They're talking about Israel. They're talking about you. We was the only one given to worship the Sabbath day. I digress.
The slave must work on the Sabbath and has little time for himself. The last Jamaica slave code allows 26 Saturdays in the year, which I have seen disingenuously represented as holidays. But as 26 days of labor, even in that climate, are totally insufficient to maintain a family, he must be compelled to cultivate his provision ground on the Sabbath. Here it was not only slaves belonging to the missionaries, but those belonging to white plantation owners. Nancy Prince was disappointed with the condition of the Baptist churches in Jamaica. She said that the meeting houses were unruly and seemed more like playhouses than a place of worship. She noted that the churches were overcrowded and unorganized. She also noted that many of the blacks were underdressed, some without shoes. According to a 2015 Global Black History report, the Catholic Church did not oppose the institution of slavery until the practice had already become infamous in most parts of the world. In most cases, the churches and church leaders did not condemn slavery until the 17th century. The 5 major countries that dominated slavery and the slave trade in the New World were either Catholic or still retained strong Catholic influences, including Spain, Portugal, France, and England, and the Netherlands. Persons who considered themselves to be Christian played a major role in upholding and justifying the enslavement of Africans, said Dr. Jonathan Chisholm, an assistant professor of history at the University of Houston downtown. Many European Christian slavers perceived Africans as uncivilized persons. They justified slavery by rationalizing that they were Christianizing and civilizing their African captors, even went as far as filtering the truths of the gospel to keep them under control. In fear they would eventually awaken to that which they're entitled to as Christians and demand freedom and equality if they knew the truth like it was. Obedience to their masters, therefore, without questioning the laws, became the indoctrination applied till date. Many Anglo-Christians defended slavery using the Bible. White Christian apologists for slavery argued that the curse of Ham in Genesis chapter 9 verses 20 to 25 provided a biblical rationale for the enslavement of blacks. In this passage, Noah cursed Canaan and his descendants, arguing that Ham would be the lowest of slaves among his brothers, because he saw the unclothedness of his father. A further understanding of the passage also revealed that while some have attempted to justify their prejudice by claiming that God cursed the black race, no such curse is recorded in the Bible. That often cited verse says nothing whatsoever about skin color. Also, it should be noted that black race evidently descended from a brother of Canaan named Cush. Canaan's descendants were evidently light-skinned, not black. Truly nothing in the biblical account identifies Ham, the descendant of Canaan, with Africans. Yet Christian apologists determined that Africans were the descendants of Ham. Nevertheless, at the beginning of the 16th century, the racial interpretation of Noah's curse became commonplace. In 2016, Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. offered a public apology after acknowledging that 188 years prior, Jesuit priests sold 272 slaves to save the school from financial ruin. This is how the New York Times first reported the story. The human cargo was loaded on ships at a bustling wharf in the nation's capital, destined for the plantations of the Deep South. Some slaves pleaded for rosaries as they were rounded up, praying for deliverance. But on that day in the fall of 1838, no one was spared. Not the 2-month-old baby and her mother, not the field hands, not the shoemaker, and not Cornelius Hawkins, who was about 13 years old when he was forced on board. This was no ordinary slave sale. The enslaved African Americans had belonged to the nation's most prominent Jesuit priests, and they were sold, along with scores of others, to help secure the future of the premier Catholic institution of higher learning at the time, known today as Georgetown University. The Society of Jesus, who helped to establish Georgetown University and whose leaders enslaved and mercilessly sold your ancestors, stands before you to say that we have greatly sinned. Reverend Timothy Kasicki, S.J., President of the Jesuit Conference of Canada and the United States, had said during a liturgy of remembrance, contrition, and hope, "We pray with you today because we have greatly sinned and because we are profoundly sorry." During the early Republic, Catholics celebrated the new Constitution for its guarantee of religious liberty while simply accepting its guarantee of slaveholding. Internal church politics mattered too. When the Jesuit order was suppressed in 1773, the plantation system of the order in Maryland was seen as a protection for their identity and solidarity. The Universal Church taught that slavery enjoyed the sanction of Scripture and natural law. Throughout the antebellum period, many churches in the South committed to sharing their version of the Christian faith with blacks. They believed that their version of Christianity would help them to be good slaves and not challenge the slave system. One of the reasons the Church's past approval of slaveholding is so little known among the general Catholic population today is that the very popes who reversed the Church's course on slavery and the slave trade also promoted that same inaccurate narrative that defended the Church's reputation and continuity, even intentionally or not, at the cost of the truth. Condemning the Atlantic slave trade. The shifts began quietly. In 1814, Pope Pius VII, at the request of Great Britain prior to the upcoming Congress of Vienna, privately sent letters to the kings of France and Spain asking them to condemn the slave trade. At this time in history, condemning the trade did not equate to condemning slavery itself. The slave trade meant the transatlantic shipping of enslaved persons from the African continent to the New World. Hence, the slaveholding US President Thomas Jefferson, prior to signing an anti-slave trade bill into law in 1807, saw no contradiction in referring to the trade as those violations of human rights against the unoffending inhabitants of Africa. All while continuing to keep black descendants of the trade's immediate victims enslaved.
This game, you're not ready for it.
Britain itself outlawed the trade in 1807, but slaveholding remained legal afterward in parts of its empire. In the same vein, Pius's private letters referred only to the trade, not to slavery itself. The papacy's condemnation of the trade became a public one in 1839 with Gregory XVI's bull In Supremo Apostolatus. Though the bull came once again at the request of Great Britain, Gregory deserves praise for being the first pope to publicly condemn the Atlantic slave trade after nearly 4 centuries of its operation. The bull was a strong one in many ways, blaming the advent of the trade on Christians who were basely blinded by the lust of sordid greed. And yet, as with Pius VII, Gregory did not speak directly on the issue of whether slaveholders in the Americas should free their enslaved people, something he easily could have included. So when some abolitionists in the United States greeted Gregory's bull as a fully anti-slavery document, Catholic bishops like John England of Charleston, SC, and Francis Patrick Kenrick of Philadelphia argued that the only thing the bull did was precisely what the United States had already done: ban participation in the international slave trade. Gregory corrected no one's interpretation, and so Catholic slaveholding was able to continue in the United States and elsewhere, arguably without disobedience to the church teaching. Approximately 4 years ago, Episcopal Bishop of New York, Andrew M.L. Dietschy, reminded a group of clergy of the ugly history of their diocese.
Okay. As we can see, and what we've heard, that the Catholic Church and Christianity was very ugly to our people. So if you are a Christian or calling yourself a Christian during this time, you might as well call yourself a plantation owner of slavery. It doesn't matter what you think about me, whether or not you want to listen to what I'm saying or seeing what I'm saying. I've given you evidence, proof, facts today. You need to get up and go and do your homework, because things are on the horizon, people, and the Most High God is not playing with Israel. He said 2/3 of you are going to perish, but the other third, that 1/3 of us, we're going to go through the fire. So the information that I've given unto you this evening was to give you knowledge and information that you need. But continue to go to the erected brick and mortar that's out of order churches that you're going to. The Most High God is not there. You calling yourself a missionary, apostle, prophet, apostle, pastor, teacher, evangelist. The Most High God don't know those titles. He don't know those titles. And so back during the days of our ancestors, under the rule and the prophets, the prophetess or whatever that spoke like me, people hated them. They didn't want to listen to them, or they always got something evil to say. Well, I have something that's good to say. You want me to believe your lying gospel that I went to your schools and lied to people in Christendom about? All right, you rather listen to them, but you will perish if you don't turn from your wicked ways. You're not saved. You need deliverance from the Most High God. But until you wake up, as long as you preacher, apostle, missionaries, whatever you want to call yourself, and before I leave here this evening, I want to say this right here. When you look at 1 Timothy chapter 3, when it talks about the office of a bishop or elder or deacon, why in the world are you people putting hierarchy on those positions? If you want to put yourself as a deacon or as an elder or bishop, and leave the deacon at the bottom in the church, why not put him up there with you? Because they both have the same criteria. It's foolishness. My people are perishing for the lack of knowledge. If you look at the same requirements and qualifications for a deacon, it's the same thing for a bishop. It's the same thing for an elder. You don't allow the spirit, because you don't have the spirit of the Most High God. She is not a he. Feminine, female, Karash Roach, the Holy Spirit, female. But because you're following some ghost and some religion, you're going to perish. And just as well as I'm sitting here talking to you now, if you don't turn, you are going to perish. Do anybody else have anything else to say before we dismiss and go about our business on the Sabbath day? What I mean by that, whatever the Most High God lay on your heart to do today. But people, you need to go do your homework, because you're going to perish. Well, you're judging me. No, I'm not judging you. If you are orange and I'm looking at an orange, but yet you're apple, that's judging. But if you are who you are, if you are a Christian or call yourself of any group or denomination, you are a slave owner. Your mindset is not there. I don't care how you profit lie, whatever you go with. You have not awakened. It's time to wake up because we're in dangerous times. And you better go do your homework. Stop lying to the people preaching about tithes and offering, communion, all these things. God never told y'all to worship the sun god on Sunday. He didn't tell you to do that. You doing it on your own. I don't care how large your church is. It's just a bunch of devils that's going to be punished along with your leader who deceiving you. And it's up to you to go study for yourself. It's you're the one that should go do your homework. And y'all lazy as hell. Y'all don't want to do nothing. Y'all want to hear everything that flabbermouth, big nose, yellow brain head preacher telling y'all. That's what y'all want. And I know he done lost his mind. Yeah, I done find my mind. I'm so glad I'm delivered from Christianity, from that lie. I don't have to deceive people anymore. And if you think I'm deceived, you better go check yourself out. You're a Catholic. You are in danger. I digress. Anybody else have anything else to say? I digress.
I think you have covered it all, my brother. So it was good content.
Yeah, I agree.
You know, so I thought it was good.
Well, if they don't get this, I'm coming on next week again too. You don't have to watch us. You don't have to listen to me because that word gonna find you out, hypocrites. You ain't been more saved than a jackleg, a dog trying to run across the expressway. He gonna get hit by a car or a truck. That's what's gonna happen to you. And I thank you all, Sister Deborah, Sister Geraldine, Brother Culpepper, for coming on this evening. I'll see you guys on tomorrow. But listen, it's time to tell the truth, whether or not they like it or not. We're going to tell it. I hear y'all on y'all Facebook and everything. I do agree with you guys. I listen to you guys lying and stuff and going on, how you so deceiving and how the people being deceived. And I just shake my head. I don't make no comments because that's one thing I don't do. I'm not going to comment on your program. But on this platform, I'm going to tell you that you are in serious trouble, preacher, bishop. So won't y'all just make the deacon a bishop, all right? All right, we got to go. Shema Yisrael, Yahweh Eloheinu, Yahweh Akkad. Heal Israel, the Lord our God is one. Shalom.
Shalom.
Shalom.